Welcome to Dr. Roger and Friends, the bright side of longevity, hosted by three Ps in a podcast, Doc Roger, Teresa, and Danielle. Thanks for joining us for Coffee and Conversation.
I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel.
You may remember that in episode 6 of our longevity series, we touched on spirituality, specifically the search for peace and purpose, and that healthy longevity is about our choices, including choices which lead to spiritual health. Now we're diving deeper with our newest series, Nature, Hope, and Purpose, finding your spiritual center no matter what you believe. In episode 1, we explored the powerful benefits of nature. In this episode, we'll explore the various ways that individuals seek spirituality as they define it. We'll discuss different perspectives and examine the commonalities among all of us. There are as many versions of spirituality as there are people. Our goal is to explore at least a few of them today. Now, we'll use some terms interchangeably. The divine, God, higher power, spirit, universe. We may not be directly speaking your language, so please insert the word that is consistent with your beliefs. The more inclusive we are, the more perspectives we can explore, and the better understanding we can gain. We hope to get to the core of what we're all searching for, and maybe make the case that although we have many differences, at the deepest level, we also have many similarities. We hope you'll journey with us in this exploration that includes all and honors all. And today we're joined by Cera Meintzer, Senior Partnership Specialist at Masterpiece Living and gerontologist with 20 years' experience as a wellness expert in exercise science and nutrition. Cera received her master's degree in gerontology from the University of Southern California. Her personal pursuits include yoga, meditation, brewing kombucha, studying holistic medicine, photography, and learning to ferment food. She enjoys spending time with her husband and 3 children, rollerblading, dancing, and swimming. She's visited more than 12 countries, and today she's going to tell us about one of her favorite trips. Cera Meintzer, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Danielle. It's so nice to be here speaking with all of you. I've really enjoyed your conversations on spirituality and the nature bathing that you spoke about in your last podcast. I'm happy to be here talking about spirituality. It's one of the things that drives my life. And there's one quote that I really like that I think highlights the uniqueness of spirituality, which you guys all talked about that in the last podcast. And it's this: describing personal spirituality is like trying to describe color to someone who's never known vision. I think that just really gets it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, very nice.
Powerful. And Cera, you once shared with me a story about a profoundly spiritual experience you had at about 14 years old. Tell us about that.
Yes, I love to talk about this story. It lights me up when I get to recount it. So I was very privileged as a young girl to travel quite a bit with my family. And we spent some time living in the Philippines. And during our time there, we took a trip to Nepal to do a 14-day trek. Our goal was to make it to Makalu Base Camp, and Mount Makalu is the 3rd highest mountain in Nepal. So it was about we were almost there. I'd say it was about day 12. And we spent the entire day trekking in the fog. We couldn't see anything. 5 steps in front of us is all I could see.
Hope you weren't on cliffs or things like that. Yeah?
We had guides. So we were trusting them that they knew what they were doing, and they were barefoot, of course. And so that night, our guides helped us set up our tents, and we went to bed. And sometime in the middle of the night, I needed to get up and use the restroom. And when I did, it just knocked me over. I got out and I was in this valley surrounded by these 22,000 peak mountains, just literally right there. Like I could touch them, and this big full moon above me. I mean, I just about vomited. And this sense of awe and profoundness and this knowing that I was connected to something so much more than just my little life. It just struck me. And that was it. That was like my spiritual awakening. And I woke everyone in the camp up because everyone needed to see what I was seeing and share this with me in this moment. Yeah, it was amazing.
Well, you were fortunate. Wow. And I think that's so appropriate. It's probably not the word. Understandable, I think, because I think the universe, many people use as a sort of a metaphor for, finding the transcendent within us because it's vast. We can't comprehend it, but we're connected to it. We're part of it. And so that was really good. Wow. Well, I went to Jesuit school, and so they hit you with a lot of philosophy and things like that, and I really liked it. But when I went, Teilhard de Chardin, he's a Jesuit, a French Jesuit. We were reading his writings all the time, and they were very profound. But you mentioned in the intro, Danielle, about what he said. He said, we are not humans having a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. I think that's what a profound jumping off point to this whole conversation. Sarah, you want to comment on that?
Absolutely. I'm a big fan of what he said. I think it ties nicely to what I've always kind of attached myself to spiritually, is that we're all made from the same energy. We're all part of the same energy. Before we come to this earth as humans, we come from that energy. And when we leave this earth, we go back to that same energy. So that's it. We're energy first and we're humans second, which I think kind of ties into what he says.
Yeah, we're also all made of the same elements, amino acids and carbon and everything. Yeah.
And there's a Jesuit story that you might know, Roger. It's about a little boy, and he said this to his parents. He was present when his baby brother was being born. And after the baby was born, he told his parents, I'd like to have some alone time with my brother. And, they were kind of dumbfounded, what? You're 3 and this is a little baby. I don't think we're going to do that. But when they asked him, why, he said, because he knows God and I'm starting to forget. So I think that just speaks to his knowingness that he still knew he was connected and he didn't want to lose that connection to something deeper and bigger than him.
Oh, that's hard to believe. But Jesuits said it, so I believe it. but that's very, very profound. And you can substitute the infinite, the divine, whatever for
Yes.
God in that statement, just like Danielle said in the intro, that this is about, the search for the infinite within us, the transcendent within us, and we all look for it in different ways. And just as you said, Sarah, as many people there's probably that many approaches to spirituality. Wow.
Absolutely. It's unique as each one of us are, as our fingerprints.
Sarah, I've read some of your work from your master's program about intrinsic and extrinsic spiritual practices, and I'm interested in that. Certainly, many people are both religious and spiritual. We know those are not mutually exclusive. But if we were to make some generalizations, Sarah, on the topic of intrinsic and extrinsic practices, what would you say are some of the differences between the religious and the spiritual?
Yeah, great question, Teresa. This is a really interesting topic. I think people don't, in their day-to-day lives, I don't think about intrinsic and extrinsic very much. But what it makes me think of is, when you think of religion, and if you are a religious person, then you do this when you practice religion. Extrinsic are those things that you do that kind of anchor that spirituality. So it's an actual practice of something where you use your body externally, and you might be doing it with other people as well. And then intrinsic is what's happening inside of you. What are your thoughts? Maybe even your breath could be a focus of intrinsic, even though it's extrinsic as well. Those are some of the things that come straight off for me.
So often that which is extrinsic is also simultaneously intrinsic, it sounds like.
Yes, exactly. They can weave together nicely, and they can also be very separate from each other. One thing for me, I don't consider myself religious necessarily, although I was raised in a church. One thing for me, though, extrinsically that I do on my own, if there's a labyrinth available, I like to walk a labyrinth, which would be an extrinsic practice. But at the same time, I'm very focused on what's happening inside of me intrinsically, making sure that I'm being very mindful as I take part in that. I think you could compare that to prayer.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's a really good point, too, when you're talking about personalizing it. So oftentimes, not all the time, but oftentimes in religion, there are specific practices and ritual that people join together, whether it's singing a hymn or a specific prayer. And people can be spiritual and create a ritual that's important to them, such as walking the labyrinth. So being spiritual for some people is creating a routine that has meaning to them. So that was a really good point. So I'd like to, if I could, as a group, talk a little bit about some of the commonalities between the different beliefs. There's so much that's different, and we know that. So we don't have to address heaven and hell and the afterlife, or God and polytheism, or scripture and sacred texts, because that's going to be personal to a specific religion. But there are so many values and ethics and principles that we just all share. And I think it would be helpful if we could talk a little bit about what do we have in common?
Yeah, that's a great topic. A couple things come to mind for me right off the bat. The first being do good work. This reminds me of what Gandhi said. You must be the change you want to see in the world. So if you want to see something, you do that good work for yourself, because it's your actions, not your opinions, that are going to make the world a better place. Another one that comes to my mind, of course, is love. And we're going to talk in the next podcast, I think, about character traits. And for me, my number one character trait is love. So love is a strong force in my life. And I think love ties right into practicing compassion and kindness. And when we say compassion, we usually think about other people, but it's really important to remember that self-compassion is just as important, maybe even more important than giving compassion outwardly. There's a Maya Angelou quote, which I really, really like. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." So tying that back to compassion and kindness and love and doing good deeds.
That's a favorite of mine too. Love it. Another commonality, I think, is Sarah, what you described with your spiritual experience as a teenager, and that is that connection to something so much greater than ourselves. So while spirituality is so individual and very personal, there's also that sense of community and connection to not only something bigger than ourselves, but our community, to other people as well.
I'll approach it from the negative. Sarah said it very positively about kindness and do good. So I'll just say it the other way to drive it home, and that's not to harm others through our words or actions. That is not consistent with where we want to go with all this.
We know you took the oath, Roger, but you're saying we should all take the oath, right?
Yes, indeed.
I have a little saying that helps me with that. Remember that, and that is when I am thinking about saying something, then I would ask myself these three questions. Is it true? Is it kind? Is it necessary?
Oh,
bravo. And I think that helps filter.
Yeah, for me, I always ask myself, like, if I think, should I say that? I always ask, who does it serve? And if it's serving myself before somebody else, it's kind of a red flag for me.
We're talking about the traits of commonality, but I want to go back to something that is very common. The Jesuits drove this home for me, and they were approaching it from really a secular direction, and that is that this, being spiritual, it's really about, and we've said this before, about being in the present. Our minds can't be in the future, our minds can't be in the past and experience spirituality. This is a common for, in fact, all religions have quotes. Maybe those quotes have been misinterpreted as meaning other things, but in effect, they all come down to the absolute need to be present. Master Eckhart, he was a 13th century spiritual teacher. He said, "There's no greater obstacle to spirituality than time." So, time, the future, or the past, or monkey mind, or whatever, that's an obstacle to attaining spirituality. It's very important you be in the presence. Teresa, you talk about being in the woods. Last time we talked about nature. That was being there because it was so beautiful. It took that to shut down our minds. But that's a common thing through all religions, through all approaches to spirituality.
So good.
Yeah, good point. And everybody has such great ideas and thoughts. The only thing that I would think to add to this list would be cause and effect. Whether you believe you reap what you sow or karma, you need to take responsibility for your actions. You can't control other people, but you can guard your thoughts and your actions.
I hear my mother's words telling me exactly that.
Sounds like you were held accountable a lot, right?
I was held accountable, you betcha.
Sounds like she was doing some very mindful parenting.
Whether she was aware of it or not, she was, indeed. I think we're getting further with where we go. Just my childhood many decades ago, but it was a different world. We're just going at a different pace now. And unfortunately, almost like a centrifuge, I think we're spinning away from the core of how we get to spirituality. And that's why this particular set of podcasts, because I think it's critical. Louis Richmond, he was a philosopher. He said spirituality is really paying attention to what matters. And we've talked about this again. Just another way of saying mindfulness, presence, to what matters. Now, paying attention, I think, is the critical component. We're paying attention to this present. And what matters, well, what matters kind of is defined by the individual. So there we go again. We're all going in different directions.
Yeah, that's so easy to remember and keep in mind and kind of use as a North Star. Like, am I paying attention to what matters in this moment? I love that. And that leads us to tools. How do we cultivate it? Whatever it means for us, what are the specific tools that all of us can use to cultivate the sense of spirituality, that which brings peace? And for me, Roger, that really stands out as a great tool.
I think it ties back to Teresa, to what you asked earlier about the intrinsic and the extrinsic. So we have both types of tools, right? We have the type that we do with our bodies and maybe with other people, and the type of tools we use by ourselves or intrinsically inside of our bodies. One big thing in the world right now, and this is hot and heavy in the world too, is especially in longevity, is maintaining meaning and purpose in our lives. So what tools do we use to do that? What are those things we do where we get lost in the moment, and that time illusion of time just goes away?
Mark Twain had a great quote. He says, the two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why.
Mm-hmm. I love that quote.
That's great. Yeah.
And I would add a couple things. I think it's a great opportunity as a tool to connect with others and learn from others. So, in other words, be willing to not necessarily change your opinion, but at least understand someone else's. It's good to connect with like-minded people that can help you grow in what you already believe, but it's also great to talk to people who believe differently because it helps us to connect and you might get a new perspective. And then for me, and I know, Sarah, in our discussions, it's important for you as well, we find mentors and teachers that come in and out of our lives miraculously when we seem to need them. And they always also help us connect and develop our spirituality.
Yeah, we're saying we're all connected, and why should we do anything to break those connections?
Exactly. Exactly. And I think the other one that was standing out, which we talked about a little bit earlier, is lead by example.
Yeah, that's excellent points, Danielle. One other thing that came to my mind as you were speaking was living from a place of wonder and curiosity. So as a tool that would be intrinsic, what's your mindset? Some of you may be familiar with Carol Dweck. She wrote a book about the growth mindset and based on her research. And she really talks about, do you have a closed mindset or do you have an open mindset? And she calls that growth mindset. So living from that place of curiosity and questioning and wonder and always being open to being surprised by things.
So good, Sarah. And I would add something that really helps me is asking myself if my spiritual batteries feel recharged. And what have I done lately to recharge those batteries? And for me, that's a sense of feeling restful, feeling peaceful. Of course, that would be different for everybody, but I think it's such a good question. When is the last time you recharged your batteries?
Well, as a matter of fact, as I record this, I'm looking out the window and I'm in Sedona, Arizona. Now, that's a very spiritual place, and that's where I come to get my batteries charged. So, among other things that I do, but it's, as you say, it's different for everybody.
Yeah, and I know we'll talk about this in future episodes about stress, not just reducing stress, but how to identify it in your body. So I know when I am unsettled and not feeling a sense of peace, I actually feel like on my skin, like I'm not quite comfortable in my skin. And that's like my number one sign to get out in nature or to reconnect, that I need to just unplug and meditate or find that spiritual center.
I can relate to that, Danielle. It's kind of a knowing. It's a knowing that something's just not quite sitting right. I live in Denver, Colorado, and I have this beautiful south-facing window. So when you said, Teresa, recharging your batteries, I do that while I sit in the sun and I get what I call my solar charge. So I solar charge in the south light, and I also get my spiritual charge at the same time.
And it's renewable energy. Excellent.
Exactly.
Well, I'm glad we're going to do another episode with Sarah because, this is a topic that's so difficult to wrap your head around. And because, again, it's so different for so many people. So I look forward to that, Sarah. Let's get together again and do this.
Thank you, Roger. I would enjoy that.
Yes, please join us because right after this episode, the next episode, we're going to talk about character strengths. We mentioned several times on this episode about how doing good works and leading by example, and some people may not know where to start. So if we look at our character traits, strengths that we already have, and we're going to talk a little bit about how we can use them. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. This was my favorite episode. I say this every episode, but this is my favorite episode.
Of course it is, Miss Guru.
You're so great at living in the moment, Danielle. You're just living in the moment, being grateful for what you have right now. And it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Hi. We hope this podcast is a source of inspiration. If you're ready to dive deeper into these concepts and really apply them in your life, join us over at Master Life. You'll have a personalized experience and lots of support to create your own long, bright future. mymasterlife.com. You've been listening to Dr. Roger and Friends, The Bright Side of Longevity. If you like the show, please rate and review, and be sure to click to follow.